The sun hadn't yet broken over the Charleston, West Virginia skyline when Detective Sarah Hoffman stepped out of her unmarked sedan, her breath visible in the cold January air. It was 6:47 a.m. on January 15, 2020. Behind her, 6 more vehicles rolled to a stop along the quiet suburban street. Tactical units, FBI agents, forensic specialists, all here for one man. The house in front of them looked like every other home on Maple Ridge Drive. Modest 2-story colonial, American flag hanging from the porch, kids' basketball hoop in the driveway. The kind of place where neighbors borrowed sugar and waved hello, where families felt safe. But Hoffman knew better. In her jacket pocket, she carried an arrest warrant that had taken 21 years to obtain. A warrant that would shatter this peaceful Tuesday morning and shock an entire community that thought they knew the man sleeping inside. Across the street, curtains began to part. A dog barked. Someone's porch light flickered on. The neighbors had no idea they'd been living 3 houses down from a monster. Hoffman's hand moved to her sidearm, not drawn, just ready as her team fanned out around the property. Every exit covered. No chances. Not after 2 decades of waiting. She approached the front door, warrant in hand, and knocked. 3 firm strikes that echoed down the block like gunshots. The door opened 30 seconds later. A middle-aged man stood there in a bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, confusion spreading across his face. He looked so ordinary, a husband.
Father? A neighbor people trusted?
Travis Woodward. Hoffman's voice cut through the dawn silence. Yes, what's this about? You're under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Layla and Nora Charles. The mug slipped from his fingers, shattered on the doorstep. Coffee spread across the concrete like spilled blood. And just like that, 21 years of hiding ended. But to understand how we got to this moment, how a man could hide in plain sight for over 2 decades while a community bled from an open wound, we have to go back. Back to May 14th, 1999. Back to a sunny spring morning when 2 11-year-old girls climbed onto a yellow school bus, excited about a field trip they'd never return from. Before we dive into this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you think you know about the people around you. Drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from? May 14th, 1999 started like any other Friday in Huntington, West Virginia. The kind of morning where everything felt right with the world. Temperature climbing into the mid-70s, birds singing, families getting ready for the day ahead. At the Charles household on Willow Street, 11-year-old twins Layla and Nora were already up far earlier than usual for a school day. But this wasn't just any school day. Today was the field trip they'd been talking about for 3 straight weeks. Layla burst into the kitchen first, her dark curly hair still damp from the shower, wearing her favorite purple windbreaker and the new sneakers she'd begged her parents to buy. She was the bold one, the leader, the twin who spoke first, made decisions fast, and never met a stranger. Her dream? To become a veterinarian. She'd covered her bedroom walls with pictures of animals, dogs, horses, dolphins. She volunteered every weekend at the local animal shelter, much to her mother's pride. Mom, did you pack the sandwiches? Turkey, not ham, right? Nora hates ham. Layla spoke at lightning speed, already rummaging through the backpack on the counter. Nora followed 30 seconds later, quieter, more reserved. She wore a light pink hoodie and jeans, her identical curly hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Where Layla rushed headfirst into everything, Nora observed, thought things through. She was the twin who asked questions, who wanted to understand how things worked. Her teacher said she had a gift for math and science. She kept a journal where she sketched plants and wrote down observations about nature. She wanted to be a botanist or maybe an artist. She hadn't decided yet. I don't hate ham, Nora corrected softly, smiling. I just like turkey better. Their mother, Patricia Charles, laughed from where she stood by the stove, flipping pancakes. 36, Patricia worked as a nurse at Cabell Huntington Hospital. She'd taken the morning off specifically for this to see her daughters off on their big adventure. Both backpacks have turkey sandwiches, apple slices, granola bars, and juice boxes, plus the permission slips in the front pocket. Patricia turned, spatula in hand. You both have your buddy tags? The school had implemented a buddy system for the field trip. Each student was assigned a partner. They had to stay together at all times. Layla and Nora naturally were each other's buddies. Right here. They sat in unison, holding up the laminated tags clipped to their backpacks. Mark Charles walked in carrying his coffee mug, dressed for his construction job, 40 years old, built solid from years of manual labor. He was the kind of dad who attended every school event, coached Little League on weekends, and could fix anything that broke. "My girl's ready for the big nature adventure," he grinned, ruffling both their heads. "Dad, you're messing up my hair," Layla protested, but she was smiling. "We're studying West Virginia ecosystems," Nora explained, her face lighting up. "Mrs. Robertson said we might see deer, and there's supposed to be a bunch of wildflowers blooming right now. I brought my journal to sketch them." 15-year-old Jordan shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep, his hair sticking up in every direction. "You guys are way too excited about looking at trees. You're just jealous because you have to sit in boring high school classes all day," Layla shot back. Jordan grabbed a pancake with his bare hand, ignoring his mother's disapproving look. "Have fun with the bugs and dirt dorks." But there was affection in his voice. Despite the typical sibling teasing, Jordan was protective of his little sisters. He'd beaten up a kid in 7th grade who'd made fun of Nora's glasses. Got suspended for 3 days. Their father had punished him, but also quietly told him he understood. Breakfast was loud and chaotic in the way that families with 3 kids always are. Syrup spilled. Someone knocked over orange juice. The dog barked to be let out. Patricia reminded the girls for the 3rd time to use the bathroom before they left. Mark checked the weather forecast one more time, making sure no storms were predicted. At 7:45 a.m., the family piled into Mark's Ford pickup. All 5 of them squeezed into the cab because it was only a 10-minute drive to Huntington Elementary. The school parking lot was already buzzing with activity. 43 6th graders gathered near the curb, bouncing with excitement. 4 teachers checked clipboards, counted heads, and distributed name tags. 2 parent volunteers, Mrs. Karen Mendez and Mr. Robert Flynn, helped load supplies onto the bus. 3 yellow school buses sat idling, but only one was needed today. Bus Hoshana 2, driven by Jean Morrison, a 62-year-old driver who'd been transporting Huntington kids for 27 years. Patricia hugged both girls tight, maybe a moment longer than necessary. "Be safe, listen to your teachers. Stay with your buddy at all times." "Mom, we know," Layla said, but she hugged back just as tight. "Love you," Nora whispered. Mark knelt down to their level. "Look out for each other, okay? That's what twins do." "We will, Dad," they promised. Jordan gave them an awkward side hug. "Try not to fall in a creek or something." The last thing Patricia remembered, the image that would haunt her for 21 years, was watching both girls climb onto that bus. Layla bounded up the steps full of energy. Nora paused at the top, turned back, and waved one more time. Patricia waved back. She didn't know it then, but that would be the last time she'd ever see her daughters alive. By 8:15 a.m., Bus Hachon 2 pulled out of the Huntington Elementary parking lot, full of excited 11-year-olds heading toward Lubeck State Park. The teachers had clipboards with emergency contact information. The parent volunteers had first aid kits. Everyone had followed protocol. Lubeck State Park was a 30-minute drive. 2,300 acres of forest, trails, creeks, and wildlife habitat. Perfect outdoor classroom for studying West Virginia's natural ecosystems. The park opened at 8 a.m., and the school had reserved the Oak Ridge Trail area and 2 picnic pavilions for the day. At 8:47 a.m., the bus rolled through the park entrance. The ranger on duty, Tom Patterson, waved them through. He'd been expecting them. Schools came through regularly during spring. 43 6th graders poured off the bus, immediately awed by the towering trees and the sound of bird song echoing through the forest. "All right, everyone," Mrs. Danielle Robertson called out, clapping her hands. "Grab your buddy and line up in your assigned groups." Layla grabbed Nora's hand. They were in Group 3, 10 students total, supervised by Mrs. Robertson. The morning was perfect, 74 degrees, sunny, a light breeze rustling through the oak and maple trees. No one noticed the maintenance truck parked near the trail entrance. No one paid attention to the man in the work uniform watching the students unload. Why would they? He worked there. He belonged. And that's exactly what made him dangerous. At 10:30 a.m., the nature trail hike began. Mrs. Robertson gathered Group 3 at the trailhead 10 6th graders, including Layla and Nora, all wearing their buddy tags and carrying their backpacks. The plan was simple: a 2-hour guided hike along the Oak Ridge Trail, stopping at designated points to observe plant life. Identify trees and learn about the local ecosystem. Stay with your buddy at all times, Mrs. Robertson reminded them for what felt like the 100th time. If you need to stop for any reason, bathroom, tie your shoe. Whatever you tell me first. Nobody wanders off.
Understood?
A chorus of "Yes, Mrs. Robertson" echoed back. The trail was well maintained, wide enough for two people to walk side by side. Sunlight filtered through the canopy above, creating patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. Wildflowers bloomed along the edges, purple violets, white trillium, yellow trout lilies. Nora pulled out her journal immediately, sketching as they walked. "Look at this one," she whispered to Layla, pointing at a cluster of delicate white flowers. Layla barely glanced. "That's cool." "Jordan doesn't know everything," Nora replied, still sketching. The group moved at a leisurely pace, stopping every few minutes, while Mrs. Robertson pointed out different species of trees: white oak, sugar maple, tulip poplar. She explained how to identify them by their leaves and bark. Some kids paid attention. Others were more interested in finding cool rocks or spotting birds. At 11:15 a.m., they reached the Oak Ridge Trail overlook, a scenic viewpoint where the trail widened into a small clearing. You could see for miles from there, rolling hills covered in forest, a creek winding through the valley below, the distant outline of the Appalachian Mountains. "All right, 5-minute break," Mrs. Robertson announced. "Stay in the clearing. Drink some water. We'll head back toward the picnic area in a few minutes." The kids scattered within the clearing. Some sat on the wooden benches. Others leaned against the railing, taking in the view. A few dug through their backpacks for snacks. Layla and Nora stood near the edge of the clearing, looking out over the valley. "It's so pretty," Nora said softly, still clutching her journal. "Yeah," Layla agreed. Nora glanced back toward Mrs. Robertson, who was helping another student identify a bird through binoculars. "You should tell Mrs. Robertson. She's busy and there's no bathroom up here anyway." Layla looked around. "I'll just go behind those trees real quick. You can see me from here. It's like 20 feet away." Nora hesitated. They were supposed to stay together, but Layla was already moving toward a cluster of thick bushes just off the clearing, barely out of sight. "Layla. Wait, I'll be right back." 30 seconds. Nora watched her sister disappear behind the bushes. She counted in her head. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. "Layla," she called softly, no answer. "Layla, come on, Mrs. Robertson's gonna notice." Still nothing. Nora glanced back at the group. No one was paying attention to her. She took a few steps toward where Layla had gone, her heart starting to beat a little faster. "Layla, this isn't funny." She pushed past the bushes and found nothing, just more trees, more forest. Her sister was gone. At 11:47 a.m., Group 3 began the walk back toward the picnic area for lunch. Mrs. Robertson did a quick head count as they lined up on the trail. 7, 8, 9, wait, she counted again. "Where are Layla and Nora?" The other students looked around confused. "They were just here," one boy said. "I saw them at the overlook," another girl added. Mrs. Robertson's stomach dropped. "Did anyone see them leave the clearing?" Silence. She raised her voice, trying to keep the panic out of it. "Layla, Nora, if you can hear me, come back right now." Nothing but bird song and wind through the trees. "Everyone stay right here. Do not move." Mrs. Robertson pulled out her walkie-talkie, hands shaking. "This is Group 3. I have 2 students unaccounted for. Layla and Nora Charles. Last seen at the Oak Ridge Overlook approximately 10 minutes ago." The response crackled back immediately. "Copy that, initiating search protocol. Keep your group together." Within minutes, the other teachers and parent volunteers converged on the overlook. They spread out, calling the girls' names, checking behind trees, scanning the trail in both directions. "Maybe they headed back to the bus," Mr. Flynn suggested, "or went to the bathroom?" Mrs. Mendez offered, though her voice was uncertain. But as 15 minutes stretched into 30, the initial confusion hardened into something darker: fear. At 12:30 p.m., the 911 call was placed. "911, what's your emergency?" "This is Tom Patterson, park ranger at Lubeck State Park. We have 2 missing children, 11-year-old twin girls. They were part of a school field trip and disappeared during a nature hike approximately 1 hour ago. Are search efforts currently underway?" "Yes, ma'am." We have teachers, volunteers, and park staff searching the immediate area. But we need police and additional resources immediately. Units are being dispatched now. Stay on the line. Within 20 minutes, Huntington Police Department arrived. Within 40 minutes, the Cabell County Sheriff's Office joined them. By 1:30 p.m., the FBI field office in Charleston had been notified. And at 1:47 p.m., Patricia Charles's cell phone rang. She was at the hospital, halfway through her shift, when she saw Huntington Elementary on the caller ID. "Hello? Mrs. Charles? This is Principal Davidson. I need you to stay calm." Her blood turned to ice. No phone call that starts with, "Stay calm," ever brings good news. What happened? Are my girls okay? There's been an incident at the field trip. Layla and Nora are currently unaccounted for. Police and park rangers are conducting a search right now. The rest of his words dissolved into white noise. Patricia's knees buckled. A nearby nurse caught her before she hit the floor. "What do you mean, unaccounted for? Where are my daughters?" Her scream echoed down the hospital corridor. Mark Charles was 40 feet up on a construction scaffold when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer. You don't take calls when you're working at that height, but something made him look at the screen. Patricia. She never called during work unless it was an emergency. He climbed down, heart pounding, and answered. "Mark." Her voice was broken, barely recognizable. "The girls, they're missing. We have to get to the park now." He didn't remember the drive. Didn't remember dropping his tools, telling his foreman, running to his truck. The next thing he knew, he was speeding down Route 2 toward Lubeck State Park. Patricia in the passenger seat, both of them silent, because there were no words for what they were feeling. Jordan was pulled out of 10th grade English class by the school counselor. Told there was a family emergency. Sent to stay with the neighbors, the Hendersons, who promised his parents would call soon. He sat in their living room, watching their TV without seeing it, knowing something terrible had happened, but not yet understanding how terrible. By 3 p.m., Lubeck State Park had transformed into a command center. 50 volunteers combed through the forest, calling the girls' names until their voices went hoarse. K-9 units from the Huntington Police Department arrived, sniffing articles of clothing provided by the frantic parents. Park rangers on ATVs covered the wider trail network. A helicopter from the West Virginia State Police circled overhead, searching from above. Patricia and Mark stood near the command tent, holding each other, watching the organized chaos unfold around them, watching strangers search for their daughters. "They're going to find them," Mark kept saying, like a prayer. "They're smart girls. They stayed together. They're going to be okay." Patricia said nothing. She just stared into the forest, as if she could will her daughters to walk out of the trees. But as the sun began to sink lower in the sky, and the shadows grew longer, and the search teams kept coming back empty-handed, hope began to crack. Somewhere in those 2,300 acres of forest, 2 11-year-old girls had vanished, and no one had any idea where they'd gone or who had taken them. By nightfall on May 14, 1999, Lubeck State Park looked like a military operation. Portable floodlights illuminated the forest. Generators hummed. Radio chatter crackled through the air. Command tents had been erected near the main parking lot, where maps of the park covered folding tables, marked with colored pins indicating search zones. The first 24 hours were critical. Everyone knew it. In child abduction cases, the chances of recovery dropped dramatically after that initial window. So they searched through the night. Volunteers arrived in waves. Parents from Huntington Elementary, church groups, local businesses that closed early so employees could help. By midnight, over 200 people were combing through the darkness, flashlights cutting through the trees like searchlights. Layla, Nora. The names echoed through the forest over and over, a desperate chorus that continued until dawn. Patricia and Mark refused to leave. They stood near the command tent, drinking coffee they couldn't taste, watching search teams deploy and return. Every time a group emerged from the tree line, their hearts stopped hoping, praying this would be the moment. But every team came back empty-handed. Saturday morning brought reinforcements. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team arrived from the Pittsburgh field office. 6 agents specializing in missing children cases. They brought sophisticated equipment, thermal imaging cameras, advanced communication systems, and decades of experience. Special Agent Linda Vasquez took charge of the federal response, coordinating with local law enforcement. She was 43, sharp-eyed, and had worked over 100 child abduction cases. She'd seen the best outcomes and the worst. She pulled Detective Marcus Webb aside, the lead investigator from Huntington PD, a 23-year veteran. With a reputation for thoroughness. "What do we know?" Vasquez asked. Webb consulted his notes. Last confirmed sighting was 11:15 a.m. yesterday at the Oak Ridge Trail overlook. Teacher did a head count at 11:47. Discovered them missing. That gives us a 32-minute window. Witnesses? None. The other kids in the group were scattered around the clearing. No one saw the girls leave or noticed anything unusual. What about the teacher? Danielle Robertson, 28 years old, teaching for 6 years, clean background. She's devastated. Blames herself.
But by all accounts, she followed protocol.
Vasquez nodded. Abduction or wandered off? Webb hesitated. These are smart kids. 11 years old, not toddlers. They knew to stay with the group, and they were together 2 girls or harder to control than one. If someone took them, it was planned. Then we're looking for a predator who knew they'd be here. The implications hung heavy between them. K-9 units worked the trails, following scent trails that led in multiple directions before fading. The dogs were good, some of the best in the state. But the forest was vast and scents dispersed quickly in open air. Dive teams arrived from Charleston, preparing to search Willow Creek and the 2 small ponds within the park boundaries. It was the possibility no one wanted to voice, but it had to be checked. Helicopters made continuous passes, thermal cameras scanning for heat signatures, but the forest canopy was thick, and if the girls were under heavy cover or worse, underground, the cameras wouldn't detect them. By Saturday afternoon, the search radius had expanded to 5 miles beyond the park boundaries. Volunteers checked abandoned buildings, hunting cabins, storage sheds, anywhere someone could hide 2 children. The media descended like locusts. News vans from Charleston, Huntington, and as far away as Columbus lined the park entrance. Reporters did live shots with the forest as a backdrop, their faces grave as they updated viewers on the desperate search for missing twins. At 4 p.m., the Cabell County Sheriff held a press conference. "We are doing everything in our power to locate Layla and Nora Charles," Sheriff Raymond Booker said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "We have over 300 personnel involved in this search. Local police, state police, FBI, park rangers, and volunteers. We will not stop until we bring these girls home." Patricia and Mark stood behind him, holding each other. Patricia's eyes were red and swollen. Mark's jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it might shatter. "If anyone has any information, anything at all, please call the tip line." The number flashed across the screen. A reporter shouted a question. "Do you believe the girls are still alive?" Sheriff Booker's expression hardened. "We are operating under the assumption that Layla and Nora are alive, and that we will find them. That is our focus." But privately, investigators were already considering darker possibilities. Sunday brought the breakthrough everyone had been praying for, and the confirmation of everyone's worst fears. At 10:23 a.m., a volunteer searcher named David Hutchins was working a section of the Willow Creek Trail, about 1.3 miles from the Oak Ridge overlook. The trail was less traveled, narrower, with thick underbrush on both sides. He almost missed it. Flash of pink, barely visible beneath a pile of fallen branches. "Hey, I've got something here." Within minutes, investigators converged on the location. They carefully removed the branches, clearly placed there deliberately, not fallen naturally. Underneath was a small pink backpack with unicorn patches. Detective Webb crouched beside it, pulling on latex gloves. He opened the main compartment carefully, as if it might explode. Inside, a water bottle still half full. A field trip worksheet with Nora Charles written at the top in careful handwriting. A granola bar, unopened. A purple pencil case. "It's Nora's," Patricia confirmed when they brought her to identify it, her voice hollow. "That's her backpack. She had it this morning. She had it when she got on the bus." The backpack's location was significant. Willow Creek Trail didn't connect directly to Oak Ridge Trail. You had to leave the main path and cut through the forest to reach it. The girls wouldn't have ended up there by accident. Someone had brought them there. Or brought the backpack there. FBI forensic specialists photographed everything, documented the exact position, collected soil samples, The backpack was carefully bagged as evidence and rushed to the lab. Why just the backpack? Mark asked, his voice breaking. Where are my daughters? No one had an answer. The discovery energized the search. If the backpack was here, maybe the girls were nearby. Maybe they'd left it as a clue. 50 additional searchers focused on the Willow Creek Trail area, expanding outward in a grid pattern. Cadaver dogs were brought in, the possibility everyone dreaded but couldn't ignore. The dogs alerted in several locations, but each time it turned out to be animal remains, deer, raccoons. The forest was full of death, but not the death they were searching for. By Sunday evening, over 400 volunteers had cycled through the search. Local restaurants donated food. Churches organized prayer vigils. The community of Huntington rallied in a way that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. Jordan Charles sat in his living room with his aunt and uncle, watching the news coverage, feeling utterly helpless. His parents were still at the park. The house felt empty and wrong without his sister's voices filling it. He kept thinking about the last thing he'd said to them. Have fun with the bugs and dirt, dorks. He'd give anything to take it back, to say something better, something that mattered. Day 4 to 7, May 17-20, 1999. As the week progressed, the initial adrenaline-fueled urgency began to give way to grim determination. The FBI established a dedicated tip line. Hundreds of calls poured in, possible sightings, theories, people who had a feeling about a neighbor. Each tip was logged, investigated, and almost always led nowhere. Forensic analysis of the backpack revealed partial fingerprints on the zipper, too smudged to identify. Soil samples matched the general park area, but didn't narrow down a specific location. No biological evidence, no DNA, nothing that pointed to a suspect. Investigators interviewed everyone connected to the field trip. Every teacher, every parent, volunteer, every student, the bus driver, park staff, who'd been working that day. Tom Patterson, the ranger who'd waved the bus through, remembered the morning clearly. School groups come through all the time. Nothing seemed off. Just kids excited about a field trip. Who else was in the park that day? Agent Vasquez asked. Patterson consulted the entrance log. We had maybe 15 other vehicles come through between 8 a.m. and noon. Hikers mostly. A few fishermen heading to the creek. We don't require people to sign in, so I can't give you names. Security cameras? Just one at the entrance, and it's pretty basic records over itself every 72 hours. The footage was pulled immediately. Grainy black and white images showed vehicles entering and exiting. License plates were run. Owners tracked down and interviewed, all cleared. But there was one vehicle that caught Detective Webb's attention. A white maintenance truck. West Virginia State Park's logo on the side, entering at 7:52 a.m. Who was working maintenance that day? Webb asked. Patterson checked the schedule. Would have been Travis Woodward. He's one of our contractors. Does repairs, trail maintenance, that kind of thing. Was he here all day? Far as I know. His truck was still here when I left at 4 p.m. Webb made a note. Interview, Travis Woodward. It was routine. Just another name on a long list of people to talk to. Nothing special, not yet. By May 20th, 6 days after the disappearance, the search had expanded to a 25-mile radius. State police from 3 counties were involved. The National Guard had been contacted about deploying additional resources. But as the days stretched on with no new leads, no sightings, no evidence, the unspoken truth settled over everyone like a shroud. Layla and Nora Charles were gone, and whoever had taken them had vanished like smoke. Hey, if you're finding this story as compelling as I am, do me a favor, hit that like button and drop a comment. What time is it where you are right now? I want to know who's watching this unfold with me. By the end of May 1999, the massive volunteer search operations had scaled back. The reality was brutal but unavoidable. You can't sustain hundreds of searchers indefinitely. People had jobs to return to, families to care for, lives that couldn't remain on hold forever. But the investigation didn't stop. Detective Marcus Webb became the face of the case for Huntington. PD at 52 years old with 23 years on the force. He'd worked everything from domestic disputes to homicides. But nothing had ever consumed him like this. He couldn't let it go. Wouldn't let it go. Every morning he spread the case files across his desk. Witness statements, forensic reports, maps marked with search zones, photographs of Layla and Nora smiling at the camera, 2 girls who should have been finishing 6th grade, planning their summer, complaining about homework. Instead, they were ghosts. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit developed a profile of the likely suspect. Agent Vasquez walked Webb through it in early June, both of them exhausted, running on coffee and determination. Based on the evidence, we're looking at a stranger abduction scenario, Vasquez explained, tapping the report. 2 victims taken simultaneously suggests confidence in planning. This wasn't opportunistic, it was calculated. What kind of person are we looking for? They're likely between 25 and 45, familiar with the area, knew the park layout, knew the trails. Possibly works in a position that gave him access or allowed him to blend in. He's organized, patient. The fact that he took both girls means he's physically capable and had a plan for controlling them. Webb leaned back in his chair. So we're looking for someone who knew they'd be there. Not necessarily. Could have been surveilling the park, waiting for an opportunity. School groups are predictable. They come during spring, follow the same trails, same schedule, but he had to transport them somehow. 2 11-year-old girls don't just disappear into thin air, which means a vehicle, probably parked somewhere discreet, away from the main areas. Webb pulled out the park map, studying it for the 100th time. There are maintenance roads throughout the park, service access points. If someone knew about those, then they could move through the park without being noticed. It was a theory, but theories didn't bring girls home. Stranger lurking in the park. The first major investigative focus was identifying everyone who'd been in Lubeck State Park on May 14th. The entrance camera footage had captured 15 vehicles entering between 8 a.m. and noon. Every single owner was tracked down, interviewed, and cleared. Hikers who'd been on the trails that day were identified through credit card receipts at nearby gas stations, interviews with park staff, and tips from the public. A 58-year-old retired teacher from Charleston who'd been bird watching, a young couple from Huntington on a morning hike, 3 college students from Marshall University doing a biology project, a fisherman who'd been at the creek since dawn. All interviewed, all alibis checked, all cleared. What about someone who entered before 8 a.m., before the camera system was turned on? Webb asked Patterson during a follow-up interview. The ranger shook his head. The park gates are locked until 8. I open them myself every morning. Could someone hike in from outside the park boundaries? Technically, yeah. But we're talking dense forest, rough terrain. You'd have to know the area really well. Another dead end? Someone the girls knew. The second theory was more painful but had to be explored. Someone close to the family. Statistics were clear. Most child abductions were committed by someone the victim knew. A family member. A family friend. Someone with access and trust. Mark and Patricia Charles were interviewed separately, extensively. Their finances examined. Their backgrounds checked. Both submitted to polygraph tests voluntarily. Both passed. Jordan, the 15-year-old brother, was interviewed gently but thoroughly. Where was he that day? Did he know anyone who'd expressed unusual interest in his sisters? He'd been at Huntington High School all day. Dozens of witnesses confirmed it. Teachers, classmates, security footage from the school. Extended family members were interviewed. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, friends of the family. Neighbors on Willow Street? Nothing. The 4 teachers who'd been on the field trip underwent intense scrutiny. Mrs. Danielle Robertson, who'd been supervising Group 3, was devastated. She'd barely slept since the disappearance, replaying every moment in her mind. Could she have done something differently? Should she have noticed sooner? Background check, clean, no criminal record. Glowing recommendations from parents and administrators. She'd been teaching at Huntington Elementary for 6 years. Never a single complaint. The other 3 teachers, similarly clean backgrounds, long careers, no red flags. The 2 parent volunteers, Karen Mendez and Robert Flynn, were also investigated thoroughly. Mendez was a stay-at-home mother of 2, active in the PTA. Her son had been in Group 1 during the field trip. She'd been with that group the entire time, never near the Oak Ridge overlook. Flynn was an accountant, father of 3, volunteer coach for youth soccer. He'd been helping with Group 2, also nowhere near where the girls disappeared, both cleared. Gene Morrison, the bus driver, had been transporting Huntington students for 27 years. He'd stayed with the bus the entire time, never entered the trails. Multiple witnesses confirmed it. Cleared. Every school employee who had any contact with the sixth grade class was investigated. The principal, the janitor, the cafeteria staff, the gym teacher. All cleared. "We're running out of people to suspect," Webb told Vasquez in late June, frustration evident in his voice. "Then we're missing something," she replied. "Someone had access to those girls. Someone took them. We just haven't found the connection yet. The girls ran away." It was the theory no one believed, but it had to be considered. Could two 11-year-old girls have run away voluntarily? Investigators dug into their lives, looking for any sign of trouble at home, at school, with friends. Teachers described them as happy, well-adjusted students, good grades, lots of friends, no behavioral issues. Classmates said they were excited about the field trip, talking about it for weeks. No indication they were planning anything. Their bedrooms were searched for journals, notes, anything that might indicate unhappiness or plans to leave. Nothing. They had no money. No resources. No reason to run, Webb concluded. And even if they did, where would they go? How would they survive for 3 weeks with no one spotting them? The theory was officially dismissed. Forensic analysis of the backpack. The pink backpack remained the only physical evidence. FBI forensic specialists in Quantico examined every inch of it. Partial fingerprints on the zipper, too smudged for AFIS. Automated fingerprint identification system. Comparison, likely from Nora herself, possibly contaminated by whoever moved the backpack. Soil samples from the backpack's exterior matched the general composition of Lubeck State Park. Soil clay, organic matter, trace minerals. But soil composition was relatively uniform throughout the park. It didn't narrow down a specific location. Pollen analysis showed traces of oak maple and wildflower pollen again, consistent with the park, but not specific enough to be useful. No biological evidence, no blood, no hair that didn't belong to Nora, no DNA from an unknown subject. The backpack had been deliberately hidden under branches on Willow Creek Trail, 1.3 miles from where the girls were last seen, but it told them nothing about who put it there or why. "It's like whoever did this knew exactly how to avoid leaving evidence," the forensic analyst told Webb over the phone. "Either extremely lucky or extremely careful." Webb's gut told him it was the latter. By late July, the case had generated over 800 tips. Each one was logged, investigated, and filed away. A woman in Ohio claimed she'd seen 2 girls matching their description at a rest stop. Investigators checked surveillance footage. Wrong girls. A man in Kentucky called saying he'd had a vision of where the bodies were buried. Search teams checked the location. Nothing. An anonymous caller suggested a registered offender who lived 30 miles from Huntington. The man was investigated thoroughly. His whereabouts on May 14th confirmed through work records he'd been at his job in Charleston all day. Dead end after dead end after dead end. The summer of 1999 dragged on. Layla and Nora's 12th birthday came and went on July 8th. Patricia baked a cake anyway, lit 12 candles and sobbed in her kitchen while Mark held her. The case remained active, but the leads had dried up. By August, Detective Webb had interviewed over 200 people, followed up on hundreds of tips, and reviewed thousands of pages of reports, including a brief interview with a maintenance contractor named Travis Woodward, who'd been working at the park that day. Routine questions, routine answers, nothing suspicious. Webb had noted, cooperative, no red flags cleared. It would be 21 years before he realized how wrong he'd been. By September 1999, when the new school year began, and 6th graders who should have included Layla and Nora filled the classrooms at Huntington Elementary, the case had officially gone cold. Not closed. Never closed, but cold. The daily briefings stopped. The command center was dismantled. The FBI agents returned to their field offices, moving on to other cases, other missing children who might still be saved. The media coverage dwindled to occasional anniversary pieces. Still no answers in Charles' twins' case. But for the Charles family, there was no moving on. Patricia took a leave of absence from the hospital that stretched from weeks into months. She couldn't focus, couldn't function. Every time she saw a girl with curly hair, her heart stopped. Every time the phone rang, she lunged for it, hoping for news that never came. She developed severe depression, the kind that made getting out of bed feel impossible, the kind where you forget what it feels like to be happy. Her doctor prescribed medication. A therapist tried to help her process the grief. But how do you grieve someone who might still be alive? How do you mourn when there's no body, no funeral, no closure? You exist in a horrible limbo, trapped between hope and despair, unable to fully embrace either. Mark dealt with it differently. He threw himself into work, taking every overtime shift available, staying on construction sites until dark. Physical exhaustion was easier than emotional pain. If he worked hard enough, maybe he wouldn't have to think, wouldn't have to feel. But at night, lying in bed next to his wife who cried herself to sleep, the thoughts came anyway. I should have driven them to the park myself. I should have volunteered to chaperone. I should have kept them home that day. 1,000 should-haves that changed nothing. Their marriage nearly collapsed under the weight of it. Grief doesn't bring people together the way movies suggest. It isolates. It makes you cruel to the people you love most because they're the only ones close enough to hurt. They fought about things that didn't matter, snapped at each other over nothing, went days without speaking, considered divorce twice. But somehow they held on. Maybe because letting go of each other felt like letting go of the girls, like admitting they were really gone. Jordan struggled in his own way. He'd been 15 when his sisters disappeared, a sophomore in high school. Worried about grades and girls and making the basketball team. Normal teenage concerns. Then everything shattered. He watched his parents fall apart. Watched his mother stop eating, stop sleeping, stop being his mother. Watched his father become a ghost who lived in their house but wasn't really there. And he felt guilty. Guilty for being alive when his sisters might not be. Guilty for the last words he'd said to them. Guilty for being unable to fix any of it. His grades dropped. He started getting into fights at school, stupid fights, looking for any excuse to hit something, to make the pain on the outside match the pain on the inside. He was suspended twice during his junior year. He started drinking at 17. Nothing serious at first, just beer at parties, trying to feel normal. But it progressed. By the time he graduated high school in 2002, he was drinking most weekends, sometimes during the week. His parents barely noticed. They were too lost in their own grief. Jordan moved out at 19, got a job at a warehouse, rented a cheap apartment. He told himself he was giving his parents space. Really, he just couldn't stand being in that house anymore, where his sister's bedroom remained untouched, frozen in time like a shrine. Every year on May 14th, the community held a vigil. It started in 2000, organized by parents from Huntington Elementary. A gathering at the park entrance, candles lit as the sun set, prayers spoken into the growing darkness. The first year, over 300 people attended. The second year, maybe 200. By the fifth year, it was down to 50, mostly family, close friends, and a few dedicated community members who refused to forget. Yellow ribbons remained tied to trees throughout Lubeck State Park, faded by sun and rain but never removed. A silent reminder that 2 girls had vanished here, and no one knew why. Patricia and Mark attended every vigil, standing together in the crowd, holding candles that flickered in the wind. Sometimes Patricia spoke, her voice shaking as she thanked people for remembering. Sometimes she couldn't speak at all, and Mark would hold her while she cried. Jordan attended the first few years, then stopped. It hurt too much, felt too performative, like they were mourning people who might still be alive somewhere, waiting for rescue that never came. Detective Marcus Webb retired from the Huntington Police Department in 2005 after 30 years of service. There was a ceremony, a plaque, speeches about his dedication and service. He smiled and shook hands and accepted congratulations. But he didn't feel like celebrating because he was leaving with the Charles case unsolved. 2 girls still missing, a predator still out there, unpunished. It felt like failure. On his last day, he boxed up his desk, including copies of the case files he'd kept. Officially, he wasn't supposed to take them, but no one stopped him. Everyone knew Webb had never let go of this case, and they understood he never would. At home, he set up a small office in his spare bedroom, spread the files across a desk, pinned photos and maps to a corkboard, and he kept working, not officially, not with the resources of the police department behind him. Just an old detective who couldn't accept that some cases stay cold forever. He reviewed witness statements for the 100th time, reread forensic reports, studied maps, until he could navigate Lubeck State Park in his sleep. He kept a list of people he'd interviewed in 1999, checking periodically to see if any had been arrested for other crimes. If any patterns emerged, Travis Woodward's name was on that list. Webb had noted after the interview. Maintenance contractor. Was working at Park on the 14th of May 2099. Cooperative. No concerns. Webb had no reason to look at him twice, not yet. In 2008, the case was featured on a national true crime television show. One of those programs that dramatized unsolved mysteries. Hoping to generate new leads, actors portrayed Layla and Nora. The field trip, the disappearance, the desperate search. Patricia and Mark were interviewed, looking 10 years older than they should. Grief etched into every line of their faces. If someone knows something, anything, please come forward. Patricia pleaded into the camera. We just want to bring our daughters home. The episode generated 43 new tips. Investigators followed up on every single one. A woman in Florida claimed she'd seen the twins at a shopping mall in 2003. Surveillance footage from that time period had been erased years ago. No way to verify. A man in Virginia said his neighbor had made suspicious comments about the case. The neighbor was interviewed, just a true crime enthusiast with poor social skills. Nothing criminal. A psychic called claiming the girls were buried near water, under a bridge. Search teams checked every bridge within 50 miles of Huntington. Found nothing. None of the tips led anywhere. By 2010, most people had accepted the terrible truth. Layla and Nora Charles were dead. Their bodies would probably never be found. Their killer would never be caught. The case would remain one of West Virginia's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Mark and Patricia would live the rest of their lives not knowing what happened to their daughters. That's what everyone believed. Everyone was wrong. Because in 2015, everything would change. A new detective would pick up the file. New technology would emerge. And the cold case that had haunted Huntington for 16 years would finally, slowly begin to thaw. In January 2015, the Huntington Police Department hired a new lead detective for their cold case unit, Sarah Hoffman. At 35 years old, Hoffman brought an impressive resume, 8 years with the FBI's Violent Crimes Against Children Division, master's degree in forensic psychology, and a reputation for being relentless. She'd worked cases across the country, from California to Maine, and she'd helped solve 17 cold cases during her time with the Bureau. But she'd burned out. The work took a toll. Seeing the worst of humanity day after day, case after case of children harmed by the people who should have protected them. She needed a change, something that still mattered but didn't consume her quite so completely. Cold cases seemed like the right fit. Still important, still justice-oriented, but without the immediate life or death pressure of active investigations. Her first week on the job, she requested access to all unsolved cases from the past 20 years. The Charles twins case was at the top of the stack. She spent 3 days reading every report, every witness statement, every forensic analysis. She studied the maps, the timeline, the search operations. She read Detective Webb's notes, meticulous, thorough. The work of someone who genuinely cared, and she saw what everyone else saw. A case that had been worked hard, investigated thoroughly, and hit nothing but dead ends. But Hoffman also saw something else. Opportunity. Because in the 16 years since Layla and Nora disappeared, forensic science had advanced dramatically. DNA analysis techniques that didn't exist in 1999 were now standard. Databases had expanded. Technology had evolved. What if we retest everything? She asked her captain during a meeting in February 2015. Captain Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, skeptical. The FBI already tested the evidence, found nothing useful. They tested it with 1999 technology. We've got better tools now. Touch DNA extraction. Advanced genetic analysis. It's worth a shot. That costs money. The department's budget. Then I'll find grants. Federal funding for cold cases. Victim advocacy groups. I'll make it work. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. You really think there's something there? I think we owe it to that family to try. He nodded slowly. All right. But you're doing this in addition to your other cases, not instead of. Understood? Understood. Hoffman left his office already planning her next move. It took 2 years to secure funding. 2 years of grant applications, budget proposals, and presentations to city council members who wanted to know why they should spend money on a case that was nearly 2 decades old. Hoffman's answer was always the same. Because Layla and Nora Charles deserve justice. Because their family deserves answers. and because whoever did this might still be out there. In March 2017, she finally got approval. $50,000 allocated for forensic retesting of evidence from the Charles case. The pink backpack that had been sitting in an evidence locker for 18 years was sent to a private forensic lab in Virginia, one of the best in the country, specializing in cold case analysis. Dr. Michael Chen, the lab director, called Hoffman 6 weeks later. "Detective Hoffman, we've got something." Her heart rate spiked.
What did you find?
Touch DNA. We extracted it from the backpack's zipper and shoulder straps using techniques that didn't exist in '99. It's male DNA, and it doesn't match any of the previously cleared suspects. Hoffman was already pulling up her computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Did you run it through CODIS?" CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, the FBI's national DNA database containing profiles of convicted offenders and arrestees. Already did. No match. Her excitement deflated slightly. "So we've got DNA from an unknown male, but no one to compare it to. Not through traditional databases, no. But have you considered genetic genealogy?" Hoffman paused. She'd heard about it, the technique that had cracked the Golden State Killer case in 2018. Using DNA, uploaded to public genealogy websites, to identify suspects through family connections. "You think that could work here?" "It's worth trying. The DNA quality is good enough. If the suspect has any relatives who've uploaded their DNA to sites like GED Match or Family Tree DNA, we might be able to build a family tree and work backward to identify him." "How long would that take?" "Depends on how many matches we get and how cooperative the relatives are. Could be months, could be years. But it's a shot." Hoffman didn't hesitate. "Do it." In August 2017, the unknown male DNA profile was uploaded to GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA public databases, where people uploaded their DNA results to find relatives and build family trees. Then came the waiting. Hoffman continued working other cases, but the Charles investigation was never far from her mind. She'd visited Mark and Patricia in June 2017, explaining what she was doing, trying to manage their expectations. "I can't promise this will lead anywhere," she'd told them, sitting in their living room that still had photos of 11-year-old twins on every surface. "But it's the best chance we've had in years." Patricia, now 54, looked older than her years. Gray hair, deep lines around her eyes, the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying grief for nearly 2 decades. "Do you think they're still alive?" she asked quietly. Hoffman had learned long ago not to lie to families. "No, ma'am, I don't. But I think we can find out what happened, and I think we can find who's responsible." Mark, 58 and grayer than he'd been in the old case photos, nodded slowly. "That's all we want, just answers, just to know." "I'm going to do everything I can," Hoffman promised. In January 2018, the first genetic matches came back. Dr. Rebecca Kim, a genetic genealogist Hoffman had partnered with, called with an update. "We've got hits. Distant relatives, third cousins, fourth cousins, nothing close enough for immediate identification, but enough to start building a family tree." "How does this work exactly?" Hoffman asked. "Think of it like a puzzle. Each DNA match represents a piece. I trace their family trees backward, looking for common ancestors. Eventually those trees converge. That's where our unknown subject fits. Then we work forward from those ancestors, identifying all their descendants, until we narrow down to individuals who match the profile." "What profile?" "Male, right age range, right geographic location. In this case, we're looking for someone who was in West Virginia in 1999, probably between 20 and 50 years old at the time." "How long will this take?" Kim hesitated. "I'm working several cases. This is meticulous work. Every branch of the family tree has to be verified through records, obituaries, census data. I'd estimate 6 to 12 months before we have viable candidates." It wasn't the quick answer Hoffman wanted, but it was progress. Real tangible progress. "Keep me updated," she said. The work was painstaking. Kim spent hundreds of hours building family trees, cross-referencing birth records, marriage certificates, obituaries. She traced lineages back to the 1800s, identifying common ancestors, then working forward through generations. By summer 2018, she'd narrowed the DNA matches to 3 family branches. all with roots in West Virginia and southern Ohio. By fall 2018, she'd identified approximately 40 male descendants in the right age range who could potentially be the source of the DNA. Hoffman took the list and began the next phase, cross-referencing with the 19999 investigation. Who had access to Lubeck State Park on the 14th of May, 1999, who lived within a reasonable distance of Huntington, who had any connection, however remote, to the area where the girls disappeared. She pulled employment records, property records, vehicle registrations. She reviewed the original witness lists, the people Detective Webb had interviewed 18 years ago. And in December 2018, one name appeared on both lists. Travis Woodward, age 47, born in Huntington, West Virginia, lived in Charleston now. But in 1999, he'd lived in Huntington. And according to employment records, he'd worked as a maintenance contractor for West Virginia State Parks from 1997 to 2002, including at Lubeck State Park, including on the 14th of May, 1999. Hoffman pulled Webb's interview notes from 1009 to 999. Brief, routine. Woodward had been cooperative, answered questions, provided his schedule, nothing suspicious. Webb had cleared him, but now, 19 years later, Woodward's name was on a list of 40 possible genetic matches to DNA found on Nora Charles's backpack. Hoffman's instincts screamed. She dug deeper. January-June 2019, building the case. Hoffman spent 6 months investigating Travis Woodward's life. On the surface, he looked normal. Married to Linda Woodward for 22 years, 3 children ages 19, 17, and 14. Worked as an independent contractor doing home repairs and renovations. Attended Riverside Community Church. Coached his son's baseball team in 2005. No criminal record, not even a speeding ticket. But Hoffman looked at the timeline. In 1999, Woodward lived in Huntington, worked at Lubeck State Park regularly. In 2001, he moved to Charleston, 60 miles away. In 2002, he left the State Parks Department, started working independently. Why the sudden changes 2 years after the girls disappeared? She pulled his work schedules from the Parks Department archives. On the 14th of May, 1999, Woodward had been scheduled for maintenance work at Lubeck State Park. He'd clocked in at 7:30 a.m., clocked out at 4:45 p.m. He'd been there all day. He had access to maintenance roads, buildings, vehicles. He knew the park layout better than almost anyone. And he would have seen the school bus arrive, would have known kids were on the trails. Hoffman felt the pieces clicking into place, but she needed more than circumstantial evidence and a possible genetic connection. She needed proof. Share this video if you think stories like this need to be told. And real quick, what's the weather like where you are today? Drop it in the comments. Detective Hoffman knew she was onto something, but knowing and proving are two different things. Travis Woodward was one of 40 possible genetic matches. She needed to either eliminate him or confirm him as the source of the DNA on that backpack, and she needed to do it without tipping him off. In July 2019, she reached out to Marcus Webb. The retired detective was 71 now, living in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Huntington. When Hoffman called and explained what she'd found, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Woodward. Webb finally said, his voice heavy. I remember him. Talked to him in '99. He seemed normal, cooperative. I had no reason to suspect him. You couldn't have known, Hoffman said. He had no record, no red flags, and we didn't have the DNA technology back then. I should have looked harder. Marcus, you did everything right. You worked this case for 6 years. You never gave up. Now we're going to finish what you started. Webb was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? Everything you remember about him. Any detail, no matter how small. They met at a coffee shop the next day. Webb brought his personal case files, the ones he'd kept working on for 14 years after retirement. He was 28 in 1999, Webb said, flipping through his notes. Worked for the Parks Department doing trail maintenance, building repairs, that kind of thing. He'd been there about 2 years when the girls disappeared. What was your impression of him? Webb closed his eyes, reaching back through 2 decades of memory. Polite, maybe a little nervous, but everyone was nervous during those interviews. He answered every question, said he'd been working on a section of fence near the north entrance that morning. Didn't see anything unusual. Didn't see the school group. Did you verify his story? His supervisor confirmed he'd been scheduled for fence repair that day, and his truck was logged entering the park at 7:52 a.m., leaving at 4:47 p.m. He was there all day, but so were a dozen other park employees. I had no reason to focus on him specifically. Hoffman made notes. What happened to him after '99? According to my follow-up checks, he kept working for the Parks Department until 2000, then went independent. Moved to Charleston in 2001. Got married around that time. Started a family. Webb paused. He looked like he was building a normal life, or running from what he'd done, Hoffman said quietly. Hoffman couldn't just knock on Woodward's door and ask for a DNA sample. If he was their guy and he refused, they'd have tipped their hand with no way to compel him without more evidence. She needed to obtain his DNA surreptitiously, what investigators call a trash pull, or abandoned DNA. In August, she initiated surveillance. Not constant, they didn't have the resources for that, but periodic observation, looking for opportunities to collect discarded items that might contain his DNA. A coffee cup thrown in a public trash can, a cigarette butt, a napkin, anything he'd touched and abandoned. Woodward's routine was predictable. He left his house on Maple Ridge Drive around 7:30 most mornings, drove his white contractor van to various job sites around Charleston. He stopped at the same gas station 3 mornings a week, a speedway on Route 60 where he bought coffee. On August 22nd, Hoffman and her partner, Detective Luis Ramirez, sat in an unmarked car across from that speedway, waiting. At 7:43 a.m., Woodward's van pulled in. They watched him enter the store, emerge 5 minutes later with a large coffee, climb back in his van, and drive away. Hoffman waited 10 minutes, then walked to the trash can outside the store entrance. She pulled on latex gloves and carefully sorted through the contents. Fast food wrappers, receipts, lottery tickets. And there, a large Speedway coffee cup, lid still attached, lipstick-free rim indicating a male drinker. She bagged it carefully, labeled it, and drove straight to the lab. The DNA analysis took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Hoffman checking her phone obsessively, barely sleeping, running through scenarios in her head. What if it wasn't a match? What if Woodward was just another dead end in a case full of them? What if she'd gotten the family's hopes up for nothing? On September 18th, the lab called. Detective Hoffman, it's Dr. Chen. We've got your results. She held her breath and, the DNA from the coffee cup matches the DNA from the backpack. Probability of 99.7%. It's the same person. Hoffman's hand tightened around the phone. 20 years. 20 years of a family living in agony, not knowing. 20 years of a predator walking free, living a normal life, raising his own children, while 2 girls he'd murdered lay buried somewhere. You're absolutely certain? She asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. As certain as science allows, this is your guy. Thank you, Dr. Chen. Send me the full report immediately. She hung up and sat in her car for a full minute, letting it sink in. They had him. October-December 2019, building the prosecution. Having DNA evidence was huge, but Hoffman wanted more. She wanted an airtight case that would guarantee conviction. She worked with the district attorney's office, building the prosecution strategy. They pulled every record associated with Travis Woodward, employment history showing he'd worked at Lubeck State Park in 1999, with access to maintenance vehicles and remote areas of the park. His work schedule confirming he was at the park on the 14th of May, 1999. Property records showing that in 1999, his family owned 23 acres of rural land in Wayne County, West Virginia, isolated, rarely visited. Cell phone records from 1999 were long gone, but they pulled his financial records, credit card statements, bank transactions, looking for anything unusual around the time of the disappearance. In May 1999, he'd made a purchase at a hardware store in Huntington, rope, a shovel, and heavy-duty trash bags. 2 days after the girls disappeared, Hoffman felt sick reading the receipt. They obtained a warrant to search the old maintenance building at Lubeck State Park, the one Woodward would have had access to in 1999. It was still standing, now used for storage. In November, a forensic team swept the building with luminol, a chemical that reveals blood traces even after years of cleaning. The building lit up like a constellation, Blood spatter on the concrete floor in the back corner. Spatter patterns consistent with blunt force trauma. Someone had tried to clean it, but blood seeps into porous concrete. It never fully disappears. DNA testing confirmed what Hoffman already knew in her gut. The blood belonged to Nora Charles. This was where it happened, where two girls were brought after being taken from the trail, where their lives ended. Hoffman stood in that building, looking at the luminol-revealed bloodstains, and felt rage burn through her. He'd killed them here, in this building where he worked, where he had every right to be, where no one would question his presence. And then he'd transported their bodies somewhere else. But where? Cadaver dogs were deployed to the Wayne County property that Woodward's family had owned in 1999. 23 acres of dense forest and overgrown fields. The dogs alerted in 3 locations. The first 2 were animal remains deer that had died naturally. The third was in a remote corner of the property, barely accessible by vehicle, surrounded by thick underbrush. The dogs alerted strongly, insistently. On December 12, 2019, excavation began. Hoffman was there, along with forensic anthropologists, crime scene technicians, and a team of investigators who'd worked the case over the years. They dug carefully, methodically, treating the site with the reverence it deserved. 3 feet down, they found fabric, pink fabric, deteriorated by 20 years in the ground, but still recognizable. A pink hoodie. Nora's pink hoodie. They kept digging. 4 feet down, they found bones, small bones, the bones of children, 2 skeletons, lying side by side in a shallow grave, exactly where Travis Woodward had left them 2 decades earlier. Hoffman stood at the edge of the excavation site, tears streaming down her face. "We found them," she said into her phone, calling Captain Rodriguez. "We found Layla and Nora." Forensic anthropology confirmed the identities through dental records. The remains were consistent with 11-year-old females. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the skull. They'd been murdered quickly. At least there was that small mercy they hadn't suffered long. DNA from the remains matched the DNA profiles on file from the Charles family. After 20 years and 7 months, Layla and Nora Charles were finally coming home. But first there was one more thing to do: arrest the man who'd put them in the ground. The 14th of January 2020, Hoffman sat in the district attorney's office reviewing the arrest warrant one final time. 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of kidnapping. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA on the backpack, blood in the maintenance building, the bodies on property his family owned, his presence at the park that day. The timeline that fit perfectly. "We've got him," DA Jennifer Morrison said, signing the warrant. "Let's bring this monster in." The arrest was scheduled for the next morning, dawn on January 15, 2020, 20 years, 8 months, and 1 day after Layla and Nora disappeared. Justice was finally coming. The sun hadn't yet broken over the Charleston skyline when Detective Sarah Hoffman stepped out of her unmarked sedan, her breath visible in the cold January air. It was 6:47 a.m., and behind her 6 more vehicles rolled to a stop along Maple Ridge Drive. Tactical units, FBI agents, forensic specialists, all here for Travis Woodward. Hoffman had barely slept. She'd spent the night reviewing the case file one more time, making sure every detail was locked in her mind. This was the moment 2 decades of pain had been building toward. There was no room for error. The house looked peaceful in the pre-dawn darkness. Lights off, curtains drawn, a basketball hoop in the driveway, the American flag hanging from the porch, barely moving in the still air. It looked like every other house on the block, like a place where normal people lived normal lives. But Hoffman knew better. Across the street, a porch light flickered on. A dog started barking, curtains parted as neighbors began to notice the police presence. They had no idea what was about to happen. No idea that the man who'd lived 3 houses down, who'd waved hello and mowed his lawn and seemed so ordinary, had been hiding a monstrous secret for over 20 years. Hoffman's team moved into position, every exit covered. Ramirez at the back door, 2 tactical officers on each side of the house. FBI agents ready to execute the search warrant the moment Woodward was in custody. She approached the front door, warrant in hand, her heart pounding but her hands steady. 3 firm knocks echoed down the quiet street like gunshots. 30 seconds passed. A light came on inside upstairs first, then downstairs. The door opened. Travis Woodward stood there in a navy bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, his graying hair messy from sleep. He was 48 now, heavier than he'd been in 1999, with lines around his eyes and the beginning of jowls. He looked tired, ordinary, like someone's dad. His eyes moved from Hoffman to the vehicles behind her, confusion spreading across his face. "Yes, can I help you?" Hoffman held up her badge. "Travis Woodward? That's me. What's this about?" His voice was calm, but she saw his grip tighten on the coffee mug. "I'm Detective Sarah Hoffman, Huntington Police Department. You're under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Layla and Nora Charles." For just a moment, maybe half a second, his mask slipped. She saw it in his eyes. Recognition. Fear, the look of a man who'd thought he'd gotten away with it, who'd lived 20 years believing he was safe. Then the mug slipped from his fingers, shattered on the doorstep, coffee spreading across the concrete like spilled blood, steam rising in the cold air. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his face had gone pale. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. There's been a mistake." "I didn't, mister." "Woodward, turn around, now." Behind him, a woman's voice called from upstairs. "Travis, what's going on?" His wife, Linda, about to have her world destroyed. Woodward turned slowly, and Hoffman pulled his arms behind his back, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. She'd waited 20 years to say these words. "Travis Woodward, you're under arrest for 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of kidnapping. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." 1810. Linda Woodward appeared at the top of the stairs in a nightgown, her face confused and frightened. "Travis? What's happening?" 2 officers moved past Hoffman into the house. "Ma'am, we have a warrant to search the premises. We need you and your children to come downstairs." "Search? Why?" "Travis, what is this?" Woodward said nothing as Hoffman led him toward the patrol car. Neighbors had emerged onto their porches now, watching in shock as their quiet street became a crime scene. Mrs. Henderson from 2 houses down stood with her hand over her mouth. Mr. Patel across the street held his phone up, recording. The Johnsons' teenage daughter stared wide-eyed from her bedroom window. They'd all lived near a killer and never known it. The interrogation. Woodward was transported to Huntington Police Department and placed in interview room 3, a small, windowless space with a metal table, 3 chairs, and a camera recording everything. Hoffman let him sit there for 30 minutes. Let him think. Let the reality of his situation sink in. When she finally entered with Ramirez, Woodward looked smaller somehow, diminished, his shoulders hunched, his hands clasped on the table. "Mr. Woodward, do you understand why you're here?" Hoffman asked, sitting across from him. "You said something about those girls from 1999, but I don't know anything about that. I already talked to the police back then." "You did? You talked to Detective Marcus Webb? Told him you were working on fence repairs that day? Didn't see anything unusual?" "That's right. That's the truth." Hoffman opened a folder, pulled out a photograph. The pink backpack. Evidence tag visible. This belonged to Nora Charles. It was found on Willow Creek Trail, hidden under branches. We recovered DNA from it. Male DNA. Woodward's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. She pulled out another document. "We ran that DNA through genetic genealogy databases. Built a family tree, narrowed it down to you. That doesn't prove anything. Lots of people have similar DNA. And you're right. So we obtained a sample of your DNA from a coffee cup you threw away. Had it tested." She slid the lab report across the table. "It's a match. 99.7% probability. Your DNA is on that backpack." Woodward stared at the report, his face unreadable. "We also searched the old maintenance building at Lubeck State Park, the one you had access to in 1999. We found blood, Nora's blood, on the floor where you killed her." His hands started to shake. "And we searched your family's property in Wayne County, the 23 acres your parents owned. We found them, Travis. We found Layla and Nora, right where you buried them." Silence filled the room, heavy, suffocating. Woodward's eyes were wet now, but he wasn't crying, just staring at the table. "We know what you did," Hoffman continued, her voice hard. "We know you saw those girls at the park. We know you approached them. used your position as a maintenance worker to gain their trust. We know you took them to that building. We know you killed them and buried them on your family's land. I want a lawyer, Woodward said quietly. That's your right, but before I walk out of here, I want you to know something. Hoffman leaned forward. Those girls had names, Layla and Nora. They were 11 years old. They loved animals and nature and drawing. They had parents who've spent 20 years not knowing what happened to them, a brother who blamed himself, a community that never forgot them. Woodward wouldn't meet her eyes. You took them from their family. You took their futures. You buried them like garbage and went on living your life. Got married, had kids of your own, coached baseball, went to church, all while Mark and Patricia Charles were drowning in grief. I said I want a lawyer. Woodward repeated, his voice stronger now. Hoffman stood. Interview terminated at 9:23 a.m. Mr. Woodward has invoked his right to counsel. She walked out, leaving him alone in that room. He'd never confessed, never showed remorse. Never told them why, but it didn't matter. They had enough to bury him. The media storm. By noon, the news had exploded across every platform. Arrest made in 1999 cold case. Twins killer caught after 20 years. DNA breakthrough solves West Virginia cold case. Maintenance worker arrested for murder of Huntington twins. News vans descended on Charleston and Huntington. Reporters camped outside the police station, outside Woodward's house, outside the Charles family home. At 2 p.m., a press conference was held. Detective Hoffman stood at a podium alongside Captain Rodriguez, DA Jennifer Morrison, and FBI Special Agent Vasquez, who'd flown in from Pittsburgh when she heard about the arrest. Today, we can announce that an arrest has been made in the 1999 disappearance and murder of Layla and Nora Charles. Captain Rodriguez began. Travis Woodward, age 48 of Charleston, has been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of kidnapping. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. This arrest is the result of advances in DNA technology, specifically genetic genealogy, combined with tireless investigative work by Detective Sarah Hoffman and her team. We have recovered the remains of Layla and Nora Charles, and they will finally be returned to their family. De Morrison stepped forward. We will be seeking the maximum penalty under West Virginia law. The evidence against Mr. Woodward is substantial, and we are confident in our case. Detective Hoffman, how did you crack this case? A reporter called out. Hoffman stepped to the microphone. This case was never closed. Detective Marcus Webb worked it for years, and his meticulous documentation provided the foundation. When new DNA technology became available, we retested evidence and pursued every lead. This is what happens when law enforcement refuses to give up. Have the families been notified? Yes. We notified Mark and Patricia Charles before making this arrest public. They've asked for privacy as they process this news. What about Woodward's family? They are not suspects. They are victims in their own right. Victims of his deception. The press conference lasted 40 minutes. Every major news network carried it live. And in a quiet house in Huntington, Mark and Patricia Charles sat together on their couch, holding hands, watching the press conference through tears. After 20 years, 8 months and 2 days, they finally had answers. Their daughters were coming home, and the man who'd taken them would pay. In the weeks following Travis Woodward's arrest, prosecutors worked around the clock building their case. Every piece of evidence was cataloged, analyzed, and prepared for trial. Forensic experts were consulted. Witnesses were re-interviewed. A timeline was reconstructed, and slowly, the horrifying truth of what happened that spring morning emerged. The prosecution's theory, supported by physical evidence, forensic analysis, and Woodward's own work records, painted a picture of calculated predation. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a crime of patience. The morning, 7:30 a.m. Travis Woodward clocked in at Lubeck State Park at 7:30 a.m. on the 14th of May, 1999, according to his work assignment. He was scheduled to repair a section of fence near the north entrance routine maintenance that would take most of the day. But at 8:47 a.m., when Bus Hoshona 2 rolled through the park entrance carrying 43 excited 6th graders, Woodward was watching. Park maintenance workers were invisible, part of the landscape. No one paid attention to a man in a work uniform driving a Parks Department truck. He belonged there. Investigators believe Woodward observed the school group from a distance as they unloaded, organized into groups, and headed toward the trails. He would have seen the teachers, the parent volunteers, the buddy system tags, and he would have seen Layla and Nora Charles. For the next 2 hours, while the students hiked and learned about West Virginia ecosystems, Woodward tracked them. Not closely, he was too smart for that. But he knew the park better than almost anyone. Knew the trails, the shortcuts, the maintenance roads that crisscrossed through the forest. He knew where the groups would go, where they'd stop, where they'd be most vulnerable. All he had to do was wait. The abduction, 11:15 a.m., 11:30 a.m. At 11:15 a.m., Group 3 reached the Oak Ridge Trail overlook for their scheduled break. Mrs. Robertson was distracted, helping a student with binoculars. The other kids scattered around the clearing, drinking water, eating snacks, taking in the view. Layla told Nora she needed to use the bathroom. Stepped behind some bushes, just 20 feet from the clearing. 30 seconds, she'd said, but she didn't come back. Prosecutors believe Woodward was waiting in the forest just beyond that clearing, watching. When Layla separated from the group just for a moment, just far enough, he made his move. He was wearing his Parks Department uniform. He looked official, trustworthy. He probably told her there was an emergency. Maybe said her sister had been hurt. Maybe said there was a dangerous animal nearby, and she needed to come with him immediately. 11-year-old Layla, frightened and wanting to help, would have followed. When Nora came looking for her sister moments later, calling her name, Woodward would have used the same tactic. "Your sister's hurt. Come with me, quickly." And Nora, terrified for her twin, would have gone. He led them through the forest, not along the trails where someone might see, but through the dense woods where maintenance roads provided hidden access. He knew exactly where he was going. To the maintenance building on the east side of the park, remote, rarely visited. A place where he could take 2 girls, and no one would hear them scream. The maintenance building, dinner CAM, 12 p.m. The building was small, maybe 20 feet by 30 feet. Concrete floor, metal walls, tools and equipment stored inside. No windows except for 2 small ones near the roof. Forensic evidence suggests this is where Woodward took the girls. This is where he killed them. The luminol testing revealed extensive blood spatter in the back corner of the building, spatter consistent with blunt force trauma. The pattern indicated the victims were on the ground when they were struck multiple times with a heavy object. Investigators found an old pipe wrench in the building during the 2020 search. Testing revealed microscopic traces of blood in the threading blood that matched Nora Charles. That was the murder weapon. The medical examiner's analysis of the remains confirmed cause of death. Blunt force trauma to the skull. Both girls suffered multiple fractures. Death would have been relatively quick, minutes, not hours. It was the only mercy in this entire nightmare. Prosecutors believe Woodward killed Nora first. She was the quieter twin, the less physically aggressive one. Layla would have fought harder, and he needed to control both of them. Then he killed Layla, who would have watched her sister die knowing she was next. The psychological horror of those final moments is almost unbearable to contemplate. The cover-up. 12 p.m., 4 p.m. After the murders, Woodward had a problem. 2 bodies, and an entire park full of searchers who would soon be looking for them. He wrapped the bodies likely in the heavy-duty trash bags he'd purchased 2 days later, according to the receipt found in his financial records. Placed them in his maintenance truck, covered with a tarp and equipment. No one would question a Parks Department truck driving through the park. He had every right to be there, but he couldn't bury them at the park, too risky, too many people, too much activity. So he drove them to his family's property in Wayne County, 23 acres of isolated forest that his parents owned but rarely visited. Land he'd grown up on, land he knew intimately. The drive would have taken about 45 minutes. He dug a shallow grave in the most remote corner of the property, surrounded by thick underbrush, barely accessible even by truck. He buried Layla and Nora side by side, 4 feet deep, and covered them with dirt and fallen branches. Then he drove back to Lubeck State Park, clocked out at 4:47 p.m., and went home. By the time he left, hundreds of people were searching for the girls. Police were everywhere. Helicopters circled overhead, and Travis Woodward drove past all of them. 2 murdered children in the ground behind him, and no one suspected a thing. The backpack, May 15-16, 1999. But Woodward made one mistake. In his rush to dispose of the bodies, he'd forgotten about Nora's backpack. It was still in his truck, evidence that could link him to the girls. Sometime in the next day or two, he returned to the park and hid the backpack on Willow Creek Trail, far from where the girls had actually disappeared. He buried it under branches, hoping it would never be found. Or if it was found, it would mislead investigators, make them think the girls had gone in a different direction. It almost worked. The backpack was found on day 3, but it didn't lead anywhere. The DNA technology of 1999 couldn't extract usable profiles from touch DNA. The location didn't match any witness sightings. It was just another piece of evidence that went nowhere. Until 20 years later, when technology caught up with his crime. Living with Murder, 1999-2020. After May 1999, Travis Woodward continued his life as if nothing had happened. He kept working at Lubeck State Park for another 3 years. Drove past the spot where he'd taken 2 girls. Worked in the building where he'd killed them. Participated in conversations with co-workers about the case, shaking his head sadly about those poor missing twins. In 2001, he married Linda Patterson, a woman he'd been dating for a year. She had no idea what he'd done. No idea she was marrying a child killer. In 2002, he left the Parks Department and started working as an independent contractor. Maybe the guilt was getting to him. Maybe being at the park every day was too much of a reminder. Or maybe he was just being cautious, distancing himself from the scene of his crime. He moved to Charleston, 60 miles from Huntington, started fresh in a new city where no one knew him. He and Linda had 3 children born in 2001. 2003 and 2006, he was, by all accounts, a decent father, attended school events, coached his son's baseball team, helped with homework. He went to church every Sunday at Riverside Community Church, sang hymns, prayed, shook hands with the pastor. He lived a completely normal life, and every single day he knew that 2 girls were buried on his family's property. He knew their parents were suffering. He knew a community was haunted by their disappearance, and he said nothing. Psychologists would later describe him as a compartmentalizer, someone capable of separating different aspects of his life, keeping his crime locked away in a mental box. He never opened. He wasn't a serial killer. Investigators found no evidence of other victims. Layla and Nora appeared to be his only murders, but that didn't make him any less monstrous. He'd taken 2 children, killed them, buried them, and spent 20 years pretending it never happened. The family's reaction. Linda Woodward filed for divorce 3 days after his arrest. She released a statement through her attorney. "I am devastated and horrified by these allegations. The man I thought I knew does not exist. My heart breaks for the Charles family and what they've endured. My children and I are cooperating fully with investigators, and we ask for privacy during this unimaginably difficult time." Their 3 children, now 19, 17, and 14, had to process the fact that their father was a murderer, that the man who'd tucked them in at night, who'd taught them to ride bikes, who'd seemed so normal, had killed 2 girls before they were even born. The psychological damage would take years to unpack. Woodward's elderly parents, both in their 70s, released no statement. But neighbors reported seeing moving trucks at their home within a week. They left West Virginia and never returned. The entire family was destroyed by what he'd done, just like the Charles family had been destroyed 20 years earlier. Travis Woodward's trial was scheduled to begin on the 13th of July, 2020, in Cabell County Circuit Court. The COVID-19 pandemic had delayed proceedings by several months, but the court implemented safety protocols, masks, social distancing, limited courtroom capacity to ensure the trial could move forward. The Charles family had waited 21 years. They couldn't wait any longer. Woodward had hired a defense attorney, Robert Klein, a veteran criminal lawyer from Charleston with 30 years of experience. Klein knew the case was nearly impossible to win, but everyone deserves representation. That's how the system works. On July 13th, jury selection began. It took 3 days to seat 12 jurors and 2 alternate people who could be impartial despite the massive media coverage, who could look at the evidence objectively and render a fair verdict. The prosecution was led by DA Jennifer Morrison, assisted by 2 senior prosecutors. They had a mountain of evidence and a clear narrative. Woodward pleaded not guilty to all charges. The prosecution's case, Morrison's opening statement was devastating. She walked the jury through the entire timeline from the sunny morning, when two girls boarded a school bus, through the desperate search, the cold years, and finally, the breakthrough that led to Woodward's arrest. The evidence will show that Travis Woodward saw an opportunity on the 14th of May, 1999. And he took it. Morrison said, her voice steady and clear. He used his position, his knowledge of the park, and his appearance of authority to lure two innocent children to their deaths. And then he buried them and went on living his life as if nothing had happened. Over the next 2 weeks, the prosecution presented their case. DNA evidence. Dr. Chen testified about the touch DNA recovered from Nora's backpack and how it matched the sample obtained from Woodward's discarded coffee cup, the probability of it being someone else. 0.3%. Forensic evidence. Crime scene analysts testified about the blood found in the maintenance building. Nora's blood, in spatter patterns consistent with blunt force trauma. The remains. Dr. Patricia Owens, the forensic anthropologist who'd excavated the burial site, testified about finding the girls' remains on property Woodward's family owned. She described the skeletal trauma, multiple skull fractures, indicating repeated blows with a heavy object, the murder weapon. The pipe wrench found in the maintenance building, with microscopic blood traces matching Nora Charles. Timeline evidence. Work records showing Woodward was at the park all day on the 14th of May, 1999. Financial records showing his purchase of rope, a shovel, and trash bags 2 days after the disappearance. Witness testimony. Mrs. Robertson, the teacher who'd been supervising the girls, testified through tears about the last time she saw them. Park Ranger Tom Patterson testified about Woodward's access to maintenance roads and buildings. Detective Webb, now 72, testified about the original investigation and why Woodward hadn't been a primary suspect in 1999. And Detective Hoffman testified about the genetic genealogy investigation that finally identified Woodward as the killer. The evidence was overwhelming, methodical, irrefutable. The defense's case, Robert Klein did his best with an impossible situation. He challenged the DNA evidence, argued that touch DNA could be transferred innocently, that Woodward might have handled the backpack while helping search for the girls. But the prosecution countered. Woodward never reported finding or touching the backpack. And how would his DNA get on a backpack that was deliberately hidden under branches on a remote trail? Klein argued that the blood in the maintenance building could have been from an accident. Maybe Nora had fallen and hurt herself years before the field trip. But the prosecution showed that Nora had never visited the park before the 14th of May, 1999. And the spatter pattern wasn't consistent with an accident. It was consistent with homicide. Klein suggested the bodies could have been placed on the property by someone else, someone trying to frame Woodward. But the prosecution pointed out that the property was isolated, rarely visited, and Woodward had intimate knowledge of it. Who else would have known about that remote corner where the grave was located? Every defense argument crumbled under the weight of evidence. Woodward never took the stand. Klein advised against it. There was no way he could explain away the DNA, the blood, the bodies on his family's land. So he sat silently at the defense table, expressionless, while witness after witness testified to his guilt. The verdict, on the 29th of July 2020, after 2 weeks of testimony, closing arguments were delivered. Morrison's closing was powerful. Travis Woodward stole 2 lives, destroyed a family, and haunted a community for over 20 years. The evidence proves beyond any reasonable doubt that he is guilty. It's time to hold him accountable. Klein's closing was brief. The prosecution has presented circumstantial evidence and asked you to make assumptions. But assumptions aren't proof. If you have any reasonable doubt, you must acquit. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. At 3:47 p.m., they returned with a verdict. The courtroom was packed. Mark and Patricia Charles in the front row, holding hands. Jordan sat beside them, now 36 years old, finally about to see justice for his sisters. Detective Hoffman sat behind the prosecution table. Marcus Webb was there too, in a suit that was slightly too big for him now. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Catherine Reynolds asked. We have, Your Honor. The jury foreman replied, on the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Layla Charles. How do you find? Guilty. Patricia gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. on the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Nora Charles. How do you find guilty? Mark closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. On the charge of kidnapping in relation to Layla Charles. How do you find guilty? On the charge of kidnapping in relation to Nora Charles. How do you find guilty? Guilty on all counts. Woodward showed no reaction, just stared straight ahead, his face blank, but in the gallery, the Charles family wept. Not tears of joy, there's no joy in this kind of verdict, but tears of relief, of validation, of finally having answers and accountability. Sentencing. The 15th of August 2020. 2 weeks later, Woodward returned to court for sentencing. West Virginia doesn't have the death penalty, so the maximum sentence was life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Judge Reynolds didn't hesitate. Mr. Woodward, you committed acts of unspeakable evil. You took 2 innocent children, murdered them, and showed no remorse. You've had 21 years to come forward, to give this family peace, and you chose silence. You chose to let them suffer. She sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences, 1 for each girl. You will spend the rest of your life in prison, Judge Reynolds said. You will never walk free again, and perhaps in the years you have left, you'll find the courage to explain why you did this. Though I doubt it. Woodward was led out of the courtroom in shackles. He never looked at the Charles family, never apologized, never explained why. He was transferred to Mount Olive Correctional Complex, a maximum security prison in West Virginia, where he remains today. Were there other victims? After Woodward's conviction, investigators launched a comprehensive review of unsolved cases from the time period when he worked for the State Parks Department, 1997 to 2002. They looked at missing persons cases, unsolved murders, any incident involving children in areas where Woodward had access. They found nothing, no evidence of other victims, no pattern of similar crimes. Layla and Nora appeared to be his only murders. But the question haunts investigators. Was this really his first and only time? Or was he just careful enough that other crimes were never connected to him? The truth may never be known. Bringing them home? On the 3rd of September 2020, Layla and Nora Charles were finally laid to rest. The funeral was held at Huntington Memorial Gardens, the same cemetery where Patricia's parents were buried, where the family had reserved plots years ago, hoping they'd never need to use them this way. Over 400 people attended, classmates who were now in their 30s, many with children of their own, teachers who'd never forgotten the bright students they'd lost, neighbors from Willow Street who'd watched the girls grow up, investigators who'd worked the case across 2 decades, and community members who'd never met the twins, but had carried their story in their hearts for 21 years. 2 white caskets sat side by side at the front of the chapel, covered in pink and purple flowers, the girls' favorite colors. Photos surrounded them, Layla and Nora as babies, as toddlers, on their first day of kindergarten, at their 10th birthday party, and that last school picture from 6th grade. Both of them smiling at the camera with their whole lives ahead of them. Patricia spoke, her voice trembling but determined. My daughters were stolen from us 21 years ago. We've lived every single day since then in agony, not knowing where they were, what happened to them. If they suffered now, we know. And while the truth is devastating, at least we have truth. At least we can say goodbye. She paused, wiping tears from her face. Layla and Nora were bright, beautiful, loving girls. They would have been 32 years old now. They would have graduated high school, gone to college, maybe gotten married, had children of their own. All of that was taken from them, taken from us, but their memory lives on. And now finally they can rest in peace. Mark couldn't speak. He stood beside his wife, one arm around her shoulders, the other around Jordan, holding what remained of his family together. Jordan read a letter he'd written to his sisters, an apology for the last words he'd said to them. A promise that he'd never forget them. A vow to live his life in a way that would make them proud. There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. The burial was private, just immediate family and a few close friends. Layla and Nora were buried together side by side, just as they'd been in life. Just as they'd been found. Their headstone reads Layla Marie Charles, Nora Elizabeth Charles, the 8th of July, 1987, the 14th of May, 1999. Beloved daughters and sisters. Together forever. Systemic changes. Layla and Nora's case sparked significant changes in how West Virginia handles child safety and cold case investigations. Background checks. The State Parks Department implemented enhanced background check protocols for all employees and contractors. What had been a basic criminal record check in the 1,990 seconds became a comprehensive screening process including fingerprinting, reference verification, and periodic rescreening. Field trip safety. School districts across West Virginia revised their field trip policies. Student-to-chaperone ratios were reduced. Real-time GPS tracking systems were implemented for school buses and student groups. Buddy system protocols were strengthened, with mandatory check-ins every 15 minutes. Cold case unit. The West Virginia State Police established a dedicated cold case unit, with funding specifically allocated for advanced forensic testing. Detective Hoffman was recruited to help train investigators in genetic genealogy techniques. Layla and Nora's Law. In 2021, the West Virginia legislature passed a bill allocating annual funding for DNA testing in unsolved cases involving missing or murdered children. The law ensures that as technology advances, old evidence can be retested without budget constraints preventing justice. The changes won't bring Layla and Nora back, but they might prevent another family from enduring 21 years of not knowing. Recognition and healing. Detective Sarah Hoffman received the West Virginia Law Enforcement Medal of Valor in 2021 for her work on the case. She was also invited to speak at conferences across the country about genetic genealogy and cold case investigation techniques, but she deflects the praise. "This wasn't about me," she said in an interview. "This was about a family that deserved answers and a community that never gave up. I just had the tools that Detective Webb didn't have in 1999. He did the groundwork. I finished what he started." Marcus Webb attended the funeral and the award ceremony. At 72, he finally had closure on the case that had defined the last 2 decades of his life. "I can rest now," he told Hoffman after the trial. "I can finally rest." He passed away peacefully in his sleep on 8th of December 2021. At age 73, his obituary mentioned his 30 years of service to Huntington PD and specifically noted his dedication to the Charles case. At his funeral, the Charles family sent flowers with a card that read, "Thank you for never giving up on our girls." The memorial. In May 2021, on the 22nd anniversary of the disappearance, a permanent memorial was unveiled at Lubeck State Park. It's located near the park entrance, where every visitor will see it. A granite stone with bronze plaques bearing the girls' photos and a simple inscription, "In memory of Layla and Nora Charles. The 14th of May, 1999. Gone too soon. Never forgotten. May all who enter here be safe." The memorial also includes a bench where visitors can sit and reflect. Patricia visits several times a year, sitting on that bench, talking to her daughters, telling them about her life, about Jordan's life, about the grandchildren they'll never meet. The yellow ribbons that had hung on trees throughout the park for over 20 years were finally taken down and replaced with purple and pink ribbons, Layla and Nora's favorite colors tied around the memorial. The park also established the Charles Twins Environmental Education Scholarship, awarded annually to a West Virginia student pursuing studies in environmental science or education. The kind of career Nora might have chosen if she'd had the chance. The family today, Mark and Patricia Charles, are still married, still living in Huntington. Their marriage survived what destroys most: the loss of children, decades of grief, the weight of unanswered questions. They're in their 60s now, retired, spending time with Jordan and his family. Jordan got sober in 2016, 3 years before his sister's case was solved. He's now married with 2 daughters of his own, ages 8 and 6. He named them after his sisters, Layla Marie and Nora Elizabeth. "I want them to know who their aunts were," he said. "I want those names to mean love and memory, not just tragedy." The Charles family will never be whole again. There will always be 2 empty chairs at Thanksgiving, 2 missing voices at Christmas, 2 daughters who never got to grow up. But they have something they didn't have for 21 years. Peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing the truth, from seeing justice served, from finally being able to say goodbye. The questions that remain, even with Travis Woodward behind bars for the rest of his life, certain questions will never be answered. Why did he do it? What was going through his mind when he saw those girls at the park that morning? Was it premeditated? Or did he act on impulse? Did he feel remorse in the 21 years he lived free? Or did he sleep soundly every night? Woodward has never spoken about the crime, never explained his actions, never apologized. Psychologists have speculated perhaps he's a narcissist incapable of empathy. Perhaps he compartmentalized so effectively that he genuinely separated his crime from his daily life. Perhaps he's simply a coward who can't face what he's done. But speculation isn't answers. The Charles family has said they've made peace with never knowing why. The why doesn't change what happened. It doesn't bring their daughters back. What matters is that justice was served, that Layla and Nora were found, that their killer will never hurt anyone else. Sometimes that has to be enough. The power of persistence. This case is a testament to what happens when investigators refuse to give up. Detective Marcus Webb worked the case for 6 years while active, and 14 more after retirement. He kept meticulous records, preserved evidence properly, and never let the case file gather dust. When Detective Sarah Hoffman took over, she had a foundation to build on. She had Webb's groundwork, his witness statements, his timeline. She had properly stored evidence that could be retested with new technology. And she had determination. Cold cases aren't unsolvable, Hoffman said in a 2021 interview. They're just waiting for the right combination of technology, resources, and persistence. Every case has a solution. Sometimes it just takes 20 years to find it. The Charles case has inspired other cold case investigations across the country. Departments are retesting old evidence with genetic genealogy. Families who'd lost hope are seeing cases reopened. 2022 alone, genetic genealogy helped solve over 60 cold cases nationwide. Murders, disappearances, sexual assaults that had gone unsolved for decades. Technology is catching up with crimes that once seemed perfect, and killers who thought they'd gotten away with it are discovering that time doesn't erase evidence. It just waits for science to advance. A message to families. Patricia Charles has become an advocate for families of missing children. She speaks at conferences, works with victim advocacy groups, and offers support to parents going through what she endured. Her message is always the same. Don't give up. Keep your child's name alive. Keep talking to investigators. Keep pushing for answers. Technology changes. People come forward. Cases get solved. It took us 21 years, but we got justice. You can too. She's helped establish support networks for families of long-term missing children. People who understand the unique agony of not knowing. The guilt that comes with moving forward with life while your child is still gone. The exhaustion of hoping and grieving simultaneously. No one should have to go through this alone, she says. We survived because we had each other, and because our community never forgot our girls. Every family deserves that kind of support. Remembering Layla and Nora. It's easy for true crime cases to focus so much on the killer, the investigation, the forensics, that the victims become secondary. Names in a case file, photos in a news article, statistics. But Layla and Nora Charles were real. They were 11-year-old girls who loved animals and drawing, who argued over the bathroom and shared secrets, who were excited about a field trip to see nature and learn about their state's ecosystems. They were daughters who made their parents laugh, a sister who annoyed her older brother and looked up to him at the same time, students who had favorite teachers and subjects they struggled with, friends who passed notes in class and had sleepovers on weekends. They had dreams. Layla wanted to be a veterinarian. Nora wanted to be a teacher. They had futures that were stolen from them on a sunny May morning by a man who saw them as objects, not people, who took their lives and buried them like they were nothing. But they were everything. They were loved. They are remembered. And their story matters, not because of how they died, but because of how they lived and how deeply they were missed. The final word. On the 14th of May 2023, the 24th anniversary of the disappearance, the Charles family gathered at the memorial in Lubeck State Park. Mark, Patricia, Jordan, and his 2 daughters stood together, placing flowers at the granite stone. Jordan's daughters, 8-year-old Layla and 6-year-old Nora, had heard stories about their aunts their whole lives. They knew they were named after 2 brave girls who'd been taken too soon. Young Layla placed a drawing she'd made at the memorial. 2 girls holding hands under a rainbow. Young Nora placed a stuffed rabbit, because her dad had told her that Aunt Nora loved animals. Patricia knelt down and hugged her granddaughters, tears streaming down her face. Your aunts would have loved you so much, she whispered. The family stood together in silence for a long moment, the spring breeze rustling through the trees, birds singing in the distance. Then they walked back to their car, holding hands, carrying the memory of two girls who would never be forgotten. Layla and Nora Charles. Beloved daughters, beloved sisters, beloved forever. If this story moved you, please share it. Stories like this need to be told not to sensationalize tragedy, but to honor victims, recognize the investigators who never give up, and remind us all that justice, even delayed, still matters. Drop a comment below. What's one thing you'll remember about Layla and Nora's story?